Hello everyone, and welcome to the 23rd in our ongoing series of lectures on Middle Egyptian and hieroglyphics. Today we will be covering imperatives, the participial statement, and a rare form called the sDmt.f. These are a few less complicated verb forms in chapters 11, 12, and 13. Each of them is not really long enough to merit their own video, unlike, say, the second tense, which of course is quite complicated. These are relatively simple but do need to be learned. Imperatives are commands, just like they are in English. They won't function particularly differently to how they do in English, but there are a few points about them that are worth mentioning. Participial statements are a special use case of the participle that are especially important for certain constructions involving who did something. And the sDmt.f is a nominal form that shows up occasionally that you just need to have your eye out for and know what it means when it comes up. So the imperative, just like in English, expresses a direct command. So go over there, that's an imperative. Just like in English, it does not have a subject. The subject is implied. It's the person you're speaking to. Also, just like in English, it only really shows up in two cases, either in speech or recorded speech, where someone is telling someone to do something, or in written advice. If you have like a book of proverbs, a book of sayings, something like this is what you should do with your life, those are usually also going to be written in the imperative because, again, it is something that you have to do in order to live a good life. And it is very direct in force. It is not particularly polite ordinarily. If you wanted to be more polite, saying, oh, I hope that you would do this, or could you please do this, or might you do this, you use other forms, like the subjunctive for wishes, for example, and we'll see in a moment how to do a polite request. If you want to make it a little politer but still use the imperative, there's this particle m, which is written as M-I-N, with the arm sign, that means please. That will come up occasionally. Unfortunately, that's going to be a little bit confusing with some of the special imperative forms. The polite forms, which are more literally let X be done, you use imi, which we'll learn about in a sec, plus the passive form of the perspective or subjunctive, the sDmt.f. So you'll have an imperative, but then the imperative will just be cause, imi, and then you have the actual verb in the passive form of the perspective. There are a couple of points necessary to figure out when you have an imperative, which is, first of all, that they don't geminate. So your second geminating forms, kebab becomes keb. That's a lot of forms, unfortunately. It doesn't really help you out too much, but just a thing to note. There are a few verbs, a few very common verbs in the imperative that are extraordinarily irregular that we're going to look at in a second. It's also worth noting that imperatives look a lot like infinitives because they also don't have subjects, but they're never going to be used in the same spots. Imperatives are main verbs. They are only going to show up in dialogue, and they're going to show up at the start of a sentence. It's going to be like the main point of the sentence is go, or do this, or whatever. Whereas infinitives, they're going to be the objects of prepositions. They might occasionally be like the object of a verb, even very rare to be at the start of a sentence. That's only when you have like that narrative caption for an infinitive, like the going of His Majesty to defeat his enemies. Not very typically where you're going to be seeing an imperative. So it won't be super confusing, but do remember to keep that in mind. And here are our special forms of the imperative. They are mi, imi, and yis. Mi, which is written with what looks like almost a redundant ayin, that is ii or iu, meaning to come. But if you just want to say, come over here, you would say mi. Imi is the causative form of redi. This one is super common and very important to have memorized. It has a whole bunch of different writings. It can be written like almost any possible way. You could have that guess sign be replaced by another owl. And any of these signs are interchangeable pretty much, though it will almost always start with a reed leaf. And just make sure to be able to recognize it, because it is common. It will trip you up. It has tripped me up in the past because it looks like the im meaning there, but it's not. It is the command form of to cause or to give. And then finally, yis is the imperative of shem. Shem can be an imperative on its own. You can just have go written with shem, but just as commonly, you will see is. And is is particularly common in this phrase where you have is ini, meaning go and get or go and bring. Just two imperatives right after one another. So that might kind of tip you off that you're dealing with something unique here. But just these three, just throw them on your vocabulary list, memorize them. They are unique, important, and common. And they will trip you up if you do not know them, speaking from experience. So we can go through a few examples. Here is that first, that is ini construction again. We have here is, ini, ni, su. This is a substantially shortened version of the actual example given because this is the part with the imperative that's important. It means go and get him for me or bring him to me. Because is, of course, is go, and then is ini is kind of the stock phrase, go and get, go and bring. And then we have an object pronoun, which is su, and a dative with a pronominal suffix, ni, to me. The reason that we can say that this is not ini, ni, is that go brought me him. I brought him, I guess is how you would take that. It would be very weird to have an imperative and then right afterwards a sDmt.f form. So you can probably say pretty confidently, because of that yis, that this is in fact a set of two imperatives, one after the other. Here's an example with that particular particle for please. This one apparently comes from the admonitions of Ipaware, I believe, as long as I'm reading Gardner's thing correctly. It is me em eb. Eb is, of course, my heart. That's pretty easy. Me is one of those forms we just learned, and it means to come in the imperative. So come, but here we have the M particle for please. So please come, Hoke supplies an O, so oh my heart, because he's addressing his heart. So please come, my heart. Just a very short example. And then we get a good example of a polite request as well, and one with imi, that the last of those irregular forms. Like I said, very common. It's as easy to find an example with one of those three verbs, I'd say, as any of the other verbs that exist. So imi, opening our polite request, cause that or let it be that, d2. So here is our sDmt.f. We can recognize the to as a passive perspective form. So let, and then whatever our subject is, be brought, but we haven't actually gotten to our subject yet. The next thing is a dative, ne, to me. So let something be brought to me. Our subject is actually wa, one, and then it has this genitive after, en cacao. And cacao, if you look it up, that is a barge, that is a kind of boat. So let one of the barges be brought to me. Or if you want to translate the Egyptian a little less literally and get across that this is a polite request, you could also say, please have a barge brought to me. Please bring me one of the barges. Something like that. You have a bit of wiggle room here. The point of this is it is a polite request that somebody get the speaker a boat. Now we move on to the participial statement. As you may have already realized, Egyptian really likes to have ways to emphasize particular parts of a sentence. It, of course, really enjoys being able to specify not only the facts of the matter, but what the most important part of those facts are. Is it what is being done? Is it the action? Is it how the action is being done, like in the second tense? Or is it who is doing the action? And that's what a participial statement is for. With nouns, it will be easily recognizable because you will see the particle yin in a place where you do not expect it. Yin has a couple of uses. First of all, you'll see it used as the preposition by. So this was done by so-and-so. That's the first usage you learn. There's also a sDmt.f form that is a narrative past tense, where the yin kind of means then so-and-so did. But in the final use, is this participial statement. And you will recognize it because you'll have yin plus a noun plus immediately after a participle form of a verb. And it can be any kind of participle. It can be perfect or imperfect, i.e. past or present, or it can be a second perspective, which indicates the future. All of those are possibilities. What makes it a little tricky is that occasionally you'll also get the independent pronoun, and in those cases it's not preceded by yin, it's just the independent pronoun plus a participle. That's the one that might trip you up a little bit more, so I recommend, making sure and thinking through if you see an independent pronoun, because they aren't super common and they're usually in these sort of more emphatic statements. This is also a possibility. You might be dealing with participial statement, especially if there's a verb coming right afterwards. So here are 3 examples, and I've put them all together. They come from a section of dialogue in the Westcar Papyrus. This is from a section of the Westcar Papyrus called Khufu and the Magicians, where the pharaoh Khufu is talking to a magician named Dedi. Now, I have cut out the parts where they are saying, and then Dedi said, and then Khufu said, and then Dedi said, because that's not really relevant to the grammatical discussion here, but each of their statements contains a participial phrase because they are discussing who is going to do something. So first, Dedi says, when asked, the original question was something like, who will bring me, or can you bring me, the secrets contained within this temple? And then Dedi says, Mek nen yinek yis yinen nek si. Mek is, of course, our particle for look. Behold, and then we get nen, which signals to us that we're dealing with something being negated. Nen yinek yis. Nen yis is a separable negation particle. It has some complexity to it. I intend on doing a whole video that just deals with Egyptian negations, because the more I read up on the subject, the more complicated it seems. And we don't really have time here to go into the details of nen yis. Basically, what it's saying is the part between nen yis is the negative part. So it is not I, but the rest of the sentence is not negated. And this is a participial statement. Yinen is our participle. It comes from the verb to bring. So it is not I who will bring it, who will bring see it, ek to you. So Khufu then asks, yin ma ref yini nf ne c. She said it's not pronounced well. It is m. Same writing as that please particle. So of course we get yin, that's marking out a participial statement, and then we get this m, and what m means is who. It is a question particle, or a question pronoun rather. Later, it will merge with the yin. It will become nem or nim. This is a form that shows up in later forms of Egyptian. From late Egyptian on, these words have fused together into nim, but right now they are 2 separate words, yin, m. And so together, because we have a participial, which means by is the focus, is who's doing it. By whom, with that question pronoun. Ref is just then, just one of those particles they can stick in as a little adverb. So then by whom yinen f will it then who will bring it? Then by whom will it be brought? See again it ne to me. And then remembering again that f is because we are dealing with a second perspective sDmt.f. So you do have to have a subject pronoun, even though for the regular participles you don't, because the second perspective is a slightly complicated form. Then we get the answer of who is going to bring it. And you will notice it's kind of a long answer. This whole noun phrase is the doer in our participial statement. Yin, where, en pa herdu 3, neti emhet en rudedet, inef enek si. It is by the eldest of the 3 children who are in the belly of Rededet that it will be brought to you. Again, this one's a future, as opposed to that first sentence where, even though in English we want to translate as a future, it is technically present. So you need that F there. And that whole long phrase, the eldest child who is in the womb of Rededet, that is the entire doer of the action. And finally, and I'm going to go ahead and say least importantly of these 3, because it's going to come up way less often than the other 2, is the sDmt.f form. This is a nominal finite form, i.e. it is a noun, but it takes a subject, and it has a couple of very narrow use cases. So you're almost certainly, if you see it, you're dealing either with an n sDmt.f, which means before he had heard, or just sDmt.f after an r or a jer, which means either until for the er, or for jer either until or also before. So it's either until he had heard or before he had heard, depending on the preposition. So for example, un merit iret f. So here iret, because that stroke, that is just the I. So his I, and then we have eu is just our sentence particle that opens it, which it's interestingly the n sDmt.f frequently does take it. It's kind of an odd form in that it uses eu and is not a circumstantial, which is usually what you'd expect here. And then that core part, that sDmt.f in the middle, is n merit. Our subjects, of course, iret f. So n merit before being afflicted. And actually, I should note that with the eu, it's usually effectively negated. So it is not only before, but has not. So his eye has not yet been afflicted, not because of the negative arms. That's an erroneous writing for the regular n. That's because of the eu. Again, this is a kind of an idiomatic form. You're just going to have to memorize that n sDmt.f means before something happened, and eu n sDmt.f means something had not yet happened. So here again, his eye had not yet been afflicted. And then another example with the other set of prepositions, en gefenu su seket f het f. So m here is the imperative of the negative verb. We did not cover that in the imperative section because we will cover it when we go over the negations more fully. So do not, gefen is then dismiss him. So gefen is to dismiss, so do not dismiss su, him. Seket f. And that t is tipping you off that we are dealing with a sDmt.f, as is the f immediately after. This is not an infinitive, but a sDmt.f. Until, because that's the plus sDmt.f, until you have, or until he has poured out his heart. Basically, until he has said his piece. This comes from a set of instructions called the Maxims of Tahotep. And the idea here is if somebody comes up to you, if you're an official and somebody comes up with a complaint, even if you can't help him, just hear him out. He'll feel better knowing that he got a good listening to, somebody knows about the problem, and will deal with it. If not today, then maybe somebody will address it eventually. It's actually a pretty solid piece of advice. I like Tahotep for not all of his advice is great, but that one I think really holds up pretty well. All right, well that is everything that we have for this video. This covers all the verbal aspects in chapters 11, 12, and 13, except for the negative ones. There is like 1 or 2 things that relate to negations, and we also have not covered interrogatives. Both of those are going to get their own videos later. The next video we're going to be doing is going to cover some important stuff about non-verbal sentences, especially involving the particle who, which is very important and kind of confusing, I think, as an English speaker. So thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.